Clearly, the ruling elite consists at any time of A, the full-time apparatus, the kings, politicians, and bureaucrats who man and operate the state, and B, the groups who have maneuvered to gain privileges, subsidies, and benefices from the state. The remainder of society constitutes the ruled. It was John C. Calhoun who saw with crystal clarity that no matter how small the power of government, no matter how low the tax burden or how equal its distribution, the very nature of government creates two unequal and inherently conflicting classes in society. Those who, on net, pay the taxes, the taxpayers, and those who, on net, live off taxes, the tax consumers.
Everybody in Cleveland, low minority, got Obama phone.
Suppose that the government imposes a low and seemingly equally distributed tax to pay for building a dam. This very act takes money from most of the public to pay it out to net tax consumers, the bureaucrats who run the operation, the contractors and workers who build the dam, etc. And the greater the scope of government decision-making, the greater its fiscal burdens, Calhoun went on, the greater the burden and the artificial inequality it imposes between these two classes. Few, comparatively as they are, the agents and employees of the government constitute that portion of the community who are the exclusive recipients of the proceeds of the taxes. Whatever amount is taken from the community in the form of taxes, if not lost, goes to them in the shape of expenditures or disbursements. The two, disbursement and taxation, constitute the fiscal action of the government. They are correlatives. What the one takes from the community under the name of taxes is transferred to the portion of the community who are the recipients under that of disbursements. Few, comparatively as they are, the agents and employees of the government constitute that portion of the community who are the exclusive recipients of the proceeds of the taxes. Whatever amount is taken from the community in the form of taxes, if not lost, goes to them in the shape of expenditures or disbursements. The two, disbursement and taxation, constitute the fiscal action of the government. They are correlatives. What the one takes from the community under the name of taxes is transferred to the portion of the community who are the recipients under that of disbursements. But as the recipients constitute only a portion of the community, it follows, taking the two parts of the fiscal process together, that its action must be unequal between the payers of the taxes and the recipients of their proceeds. Nor can it be otherwise, unless what is collected from each individual in the shape of taxes shall be returned to him in that of disbursements, which would make the process nugatory and absurd. The necessary result, then, of the unequal fiscal action of the government is to divide the community into two great classes, one consisting of those who, in reality, pay the taxes, and, of course, bear exclusively the burden of supporting the government, and the other of those who are the recipients of their proceeds through disbursements, and who are, in fact, supported by the government. Or, in fewer words, to divide it into taxpayers and tax consumers. But the effect of this is to place them in antagonistic relations in reference to the fiscal action of the government, and the entire course of policy therewith connected. For the greater the taxes and disbursements, the greater the gain of the one and the loss of the other, and vice versa. The effect, then, of every increase is to enrich and strengthen the one, and impoverish and weaken the other. If states have everywhere been run by an oligarchic group of predators, how have they been able to maintain their rule over the mass of the population? The answer, as the philosopher David Hume pointed out over 2 centuries ago, is that in the long run, every government, no matter how dictatorial, rests on the support of the majority of its subjects. Now, this does not, of course, render these governments voluntary, since the very existence of the tax and other coercive powers shows how much compulsion the state must exercise. Nor does the majority support have to be eager and enthusiastic approval. It could well be mere passive acquiescence and resignation. The conjunction in the famous phrase, death and taxes, implies a passive and resigned acceptance to the assumed inevitability of the state and its taxation. The tax consumers, the groups that benefit from the operations of the state, will of course be eager rather than passive followers of the state mechanism, but these are only a minority. How is the compliance and acquiescence of the mass of the population to be secured? Here we come to the central problem of political philosophy, that branch of philosophy that deals with politics, the exercise of regularized violence, the mystery of civil obedience. Why do people obey the edicts and depredations of the ruling elite? Conservative writer James Burnham, who is the reverse of libertarian, put the problem very clearly, admitting that there is no rational justification for civil obedience. Neither the source nor the justification of government can be put in wholly rational terms. Why should I accept the hereditary or democratic or any other principle of legitimacy? Why should a principle justify the rule of that man over me? His own answer is hardly calculated to convince many others. I accept the principle, well, because I do, because that is the way it is and has been. But suppose that one does not accept the principle. What will the way be then? And why have the bulk of subjects agreed to accept it? The answer is that, since the early origins of the state, its rulers have always turned, as a necessary bolster to their rule, to an alliance with society's class of intellectuals. The masses do not create their own abstract ideas, or indeed think through these ideas independently. They follow passively the ideas adopted and promulgated by the body of intellectuals, who become the effective opinion molders in society. And since it is precisely a molding of opinion on behalf of the rulers that the state almost desperately needs, this forms a firm basis for the age-old alliance of the intellectuals and the ruling classes of the state. The alliance is based on a quid pro quo. On the one hand, the intellectuals spread among the masses the idea that the state and its rulers are wise, good, sometimes divine, and at the very least inevitable and better than any conceivable alternatives. In return for this panoply of ideology, the state incorporates the intellectuals as part of the ruling elite, granting them power, status, prestige, and material security. Furthermore, intellectuals are needed to staff the bureaucracy and to plan the economy and society. Before the modern era, particularly potent among the intellectual handmaidens of the state was the priestly caste, cementing the powerful and terrible alliance of warrior chief and medicine man, of throne and altar. The state established the church, and conferred upon it power, prestige, and wealth extracted from its subjects. In return, the church anointed the state with divine sanction, and inculcated this sanction into the populace. In the modern era, when theocratic arguments have lost much of their luster among the public, the intellectuals have posed as the scientific cadre of experts, and have been busy informing the hapless public that political affairs, foreign and domestic, are much too complex for the average person to bother his head about. Only the state and its core of intellectual experts, planners, scientists, economists, and national security managers can possibly hope to deal with these problems. The role of the masses, even in democracies, is to ratify and assent to the decisions of their knowledgeable rulers. Historically, the union of church and state, of throne and altar, has been the most effective device for inducing obedience and support among the subjects. Burnham attests to the power of myth and mystery in inducing support when he writes that, in ancient times, before the illusions of science had corrupted traditional wisdom, the founders of cities were known to be gods or demigods. To the established priestcraft, the ruler was either anointed by God, or, in the case of the absolute rule of many Oriental despotisms, was even himself God. Hence, any questioning or resistance to his rule would be blasphemy. Many and subtle are the ideological weapons the state and its intellectuals have used over the centuries to induce their subjects to accept their rule. One excellent weapon has been the power of tradition. The longer lasting the rule of any given state, the more powerful this weapon. For then the X dynasty or the Y state has the seeming weight of centuries of tradition behind it. Worship of one's ancestors then becomes a none too subtle means of cultivating worship of one's ancestral rulers. The force of tradition is, of course, bolstered by ancient habit, which confirms the subjects in the seeming propriety and legitimacy of the rule under which they live. Thus the political theorist Bertrand de Jouvenel has written, "The essential reason for obedience is that it has become a habit of the species. Power is for us a fact of nature. From the earliest days of recorded history it has always presided over human destinies. The authorities which ruled in former times did not disappear without bequeathing to their successors their privilege, nor without leaving in men's minds imprints which are cumulative in their effect. The succession of governments which, in the course of centuries, rule the same society may be looked on as one underlying government which takes on continuous accretions. Another potent ideological force is for the state to deprecate the individual and exalt either the past or the present collectivity of society. Any isolated voice, any raiser of new doubts, can then be attacked as a profane violator of the wisdom of his ancestors. Moreover, any new idea, much less any new critical idea, must necessarily begin as a small minority opinion. Therefore, in order to ward off any potentially dangerous idea from threatening majority acceptance of its rule, the state will try to nip the new idea in the bud by ridiculing any view that sets itself against mass opinion,